Okay, if you have your Bible this morning, James 4:14, the Bible says, "Whereas you know not what shall be on the morrow, for what is your life? It is even a vapor that appeareth for a little time and then vanisheth away." The title of the message is, "What is your life?" And if you look at what the Bible has to say, most critical book on the planet, there's no doubt about it, what it says about a man's life. And this specifically, we're going to look at a lost man's life. What is his life? And the first one here says, "It is like unto a vapor that appeareth for a little time and then vanisheth away." I mean, what a thing to say about a man's life, to say it's like a vapor. If you've ever had a vaporizer, I mean, you just see this little wisp of moisture coming out of the top, and then it's gone. The Bible also, when it talks about a vapor, is talking about smoke. And a man's life is like the smoke coming out of a chimney. You only see it for a few seconds, and then it's dispersed and gone. And that's what he's saying that man's life is like. It's just dispersed and gone. Life is fleeting and fast. Now, you can't tell a 15-year-old that's waiting until they're 16 to get their license that life is fleeting and fast. But you tell somebody my age that sees the seasons go by and the years go by and it's quicker and quicker and quicker and quicker. And next thing you know, I'm an old man. I remember being young. Yes, I do. Now, I may forget here shortly, the older I get, but I remember being young. I even still feel young on the inside. The outside, not so much. Well, and life just keeps getting quicker. How many of you know that? Year after year. And listen, the older you get, the faster it goes, man. And I mean, it's hard to believe. 2015? Are you kidding? I'm still dating my checks 1995. I was in the 1900s. I was born in 1960. I've been in the 1900s for a long time. It's hard to break the habit. To believe that 2015, it just shocks me to think, and how fast time. I thought I'll never live to be 35 or never live to be 40, never live to see the millennium, 2015, here I am. Still kicking. Not very high. But I can tell you one thing, it's like a vapor and it's like smoke. It's short. Folks that say, "Oh, I just want to live." If this is it, wow, what a tragedy. This is way too short, man. I mean, you look at those fellows back there in Genesis before the flood, they had some longevity. Now, you talk about living for 950 years or 969 years. That's Methuselah, I believe. 969 years, that's a good long time. You can get something accomplished in about 1,000 years. I could get some fence put up, and I mean, I could probably have a couple hundred head of cattle, and, I could work enough jobs to finally pay off something too. It might take me 900 years. I'm sure they'd have 700-year loans then, instead of 30-year. There's a reason they're 30 years. They know you're going to kick the bucket. But quick, man, life is just over. For lost people, feel sorry for them. This is it? 70 years, 80, 90 if you're lucky. If you're real lucky, 100. But most people around 70. And out they go. Quick. Hosea 13:3 says, "Therefore they shall be as the morning cloud, as the early dew that passeth away, as the shaft that is driven with the whirlwind out of the floor, and as the smoke out of a chimney." You know that when they're separating wheat from chaff, they just go out there in a place where there's good wind, good breeze, and just throw it up in the air, and the shaft just gets blown away. And then there it is, and then it's gone. It's gone out of your sight. It's like the morning dew, it's there for just a little while, and then it's gone. Like the smoke out of a chimney. It's just gone. And that's how quick. He's saying, listen, your life is that quick. You compare that to the eons of time that God has promised those that trust His Son, and man, you know what? It is just a blink of an eye. Anybody that sells for that is stupid. There's got to be more to life than just this 70 years down here, man. Isaiah 51:6 says, "Lift up your eyes to the heavens and look upon the earth beneath. For the heavens shall vanish away like smoke, and the earth shall wax old like a garment. And they that dwell therein shall die in like manner." He's saying you're the same way. you're just like an old garment, getting moth-eaten, holes in you and everything. Taking, him coming out, threads everywhere, getting threadbare. But also he says you're like that smoke, man, just like when he's going to do this universe. We're in the same condition. Even the universe not going to be around all that long. Folks don't realize it, man, but the total time from him constructing that universe to melting it down is only 7 millennium. I don't care what the signs tell you. There ain't our universe is not a day over 6,000 years old. Now the earth, that might be a different issue. But the heavens around it and the stars and the sun and the moon, not a day over 6,000 years. That'll throw them for a loop, won't it? Find out the earth is 1 billion years old and everything around it is not even 10,000 years old. That's the way the Lord does things, just to throw the scientists for a loop and those that reject His word. Anyway, we won't get into that. There's some discussion about that, and I wouldn't let somebody burn me at the stake either way, but I know this. I know that universe is not older than 6,000 years. I'll stand for that. The book of Job says your life is swift and a few days. He said over in Job 7:6, my days are swifter than a weaver's shuttle and are spent without hope. I didn't know what that was until I saw one of them weaver shuttles. I always think that somebody's going to get their hands smashed. They take those shuttles and they drive them down. They're real quick, They're trying to make rugs or they're trying to make fabric to make something. It's a weaver shuttle. It's just putting together all these threads and everything, but it goes so fast. If you've ever saw somebody, he says, your life like that. Your life's like a weaver shuttle. He also said in Job 9:25, he says, now my days are swifter than a post. I got to thinking, there's a post in the ground. What's so swift about that? But there's also what we call the post office. And we talk about a message or a post, and also it means something that's swift when something's a post. I think it has a racing term to it, but I'm not sure what the racing term has to do. But swifter than a post. And then Job said this about it. He said, Job 14:1, man that is born of a woman is a few days and full of trouble. It's bad enough you don't have much time, but then you got all this trouble comes with it. Trouble. Pain and suffering and mortgages and bankruptcies and all the things that come with life. I mean, you got more trouble than you got good. I'm glad that's not all there is. I understand why people jump off buildings. I understand why they end their life. They understand. Listen, they understand what I'm about to tell you next. They understand exactly what Solomon found when he applied himself to the things of life. And you know what Solomon said time and time again? He said, vanity and vexation of spirit. And listen, without God, he is exactly right. It is vanity and vexation of spirit. A man's life without God is just that. I'm going to read you a couple of these. Ecclesiastes chapter 1, and I'm going to read verse 14, and then Ecclesiastes 2:11, and verse 17, verse 26. Just a few of these verses. I just want you to get what Solomon discovered when he applied his heart to the philosophies of this world. He says, I have seen all the works that are done under the sun, and behold, all is vanity and vexation of spirit. Now, I'll tell you what, if there's anybody that would know, it would be Solomon. He had the money to try everything he wanted to try. There's so much silver in his kingdom at the time, it was about as worthless as rocks. It says, then I looked on all the works that my hands had wrought, and on the labor that I had labored to do, and behold, all is vanity and vexation of spirit, and there was no profit under the sun. Now remember, Solomon's looking at this thing under the sun. We're not talking about any understanding of eternal things with God. He's saying as a man gets up every morning and looks at that sun and looks at his life, he said, all is vanity and vexation. The guy going to work every day for 40 years without God and taking care of his family. You know what Solomon said about him? It's all vanity and vexation of spirit. He said, therefore I hated life. A lot of people come to that conclusion. They realize how vain and how vexing it is, and they end it all. Therefore I hated life, because the work that is wrought under the sun is grievous unto me, for all is vanity and vexation of spirit. And then he said this, for God giveth to a man that is good in his sight wisdom and knowledge and joy. But to the sinner he giveth travail, to gather and to heap up, that he may give to him that is good before God. This also is vanity and vexation of spirit. You know what he just said? All these sinners out there that have rejected God and what they're working for me. Whatever they build, the cities they build, the wells they dig, the things they produce, we'll be the ones to enjoy them in the millennium. They leave them for us. God said, I'll give them to the good. We're good because we're in God. We're in Jesus Christ. You realize you spend an entire lifetime, an unsaved man spends an entire lifetime, and some of them work hard. They'll take 4, 6, 8, 10 years of schooling so that they can master their craft. And then they work hard. And they work hard every day, getting up every day. You know what? That was, to me, was vanity and vexation of spirit. I got to work how many hours in a week? 40? I wish. My average is probably around 55 to 60 hours when I worked out there, when I worked a secular job. I mean, every job I've ever worked, I've worked that many hours. But I mean, just 40 hours when I got out of high school, I said, what? You mean I don't get the summer off? It shocked me. What? I got to go to work now forever? And you work and you work, and you know what? You work the best years of your life out there, don't you? Serving somebody else. And if you're very fortunate, you'll make a large enough wage, you might be able to afford a house. And if you're even fortunate on top of that, maybe you'll get it paid off. And if you're fortunate above that, maybe you'll get some things added to your life, some pleasure things, Maybe you'll have a boat, a couple jet skis, Maybe a trailer, maybe a pop-up camper if you're not so wealthy. Or maybe you'll have one of them big old long, huge Class A's, that has everything in it. That's what I'd like, in case you wanted to buy me something. They're only about $150,000, something like that. But you might add a bunch of play pretties to your life, but you know what? You're going to die. And probably by the time you can afford all those, you're going to be too old to enjoy them. Not like you could if you were young. That's what happens? It's a frustrating thing for parents because they're thinking to themselves, we're working ourselves, all we can think about is work. All we can think about is putting food on the table and taking care of all the labor that needs to be taken care of. And then they finally get old enough to retire if their kids let them. And you know what they have then? They got hospital bills, joint pain, they got bursitis, they got the arthritis, they got to replace the joints because they're all wore out. You think that ain't vanity and vexation? Now on top of that, guess what? You die. And you leave all that money you earned and all those things that you labored for, you might leave them to an idiot. You know that's what Solomon was worried about? That he would leave everything to a fool. Do you know that he did? Rehoboam was a fool. And everything that Solomon had was left to that idiot. You don't want to say that about your own children, but sometimes you raise a fool. And all that labor, and it goes to them. Don't be a fool. Somehow I don't think I'm leaving too much behind. But man, that is vanity and vexation of spirit. After a while, you get it. That's why people become, they go from being a bleeding heart liberal, they wouldn't step on an ant, to a conservative that wants to kill them all. You change over time. The ones at Woodstock are now, right-wing conservatives because they've lived and they've learned. And they've learned that, life can be very vain. And somebody else will suck the living life out of you if you let them. Because they're out there. They're lining up. Look at Obamacare. They're lining up. And you know what they're doing? They're just taking their straw and they're putting it in your milkshake. They're putting it in. They're sitting at your table eating your food because they're too lazy to go out there and get it. Because hey, man, that's kind of vain and do all that hard work when somebody else will do it for me. You know what the Bible says about that bunch? Let them starve. That's what it says. Go over and read it. Was that 2 Thessalonians 3? I believe that's where it's at. They don't work, they don't eat. But the fact that you're just going to leave it, the fact that you're just going to leave it all behind, is that it? Third one is a man's life without God it is an alien existence in God's universe. I want to talk about who the real aliens are. And it's not us. The real aliens are all these sinners out here that have rejected Christ. The Bible says they're the aliens. However you want to put that, E.T., or somebody jumping a fence south of the border, don't matter to me. They're all aliens. He said in Ephesians 2:12 that at that time you were without Christ, being aliens from the commonwealth of Israel and strangers from the covenants of promise, having no hope and without God in the world. The alien presence on this planet, we're not waiting for them to come down. They're already here. And as long as they reject Christ, they're aliens to God. What is your life? Like a vapor? Vanity? Vexation of spirit? Now you find out you're an alien. Listen, you know what God's got for this? You know what God's got in the future? Everything for His children. Period. You need to be in the family of God. And if you're not in the family of God, then your life is vain. It's worthless. Absolutely. I don't care what you've achieved. I don't care how smart you are. I don't care how many degrees you have behind your name. Your life is vanity and vexation of spirit. It's worthless. The other thing is a man's life without God, and this is a verse, this verse actually terrifies me. Because I remember at one time I was a lost man too. And it terrifies me to think about this verse. It says there in Ecclesiastes chapter 9, if you like to turn there, Ecclesiastes chapter 9, verse 11 and 12. And it says, I returned and saw under the sun, remember this is all under the sun, that the race is not to the swift, nor the battle to the strong, neither yet bread to the wise, nor yet riches to men of understanding, nor yet favor to men of skill. But time and chance happeneth to them all. For man also knoweth not his time, as the fishes that are taken in an evil net, and as the birds that are caught in a snare, so are the sons of men snared in an evil time, when it falleth suddenly upon them. You know what he's saying there? Oh, man. You know what your life is like? It's like the throw of the dice. When you're unsaved, things are happening in your life and you may think, well, God took care of me there. Maybe He didn't. Maybe time and chance is the only thing. Maybe it was pure, blind luck. Because you can read about other accounts where God didn't step in that case. Let me give you an example of this. A fellow named Jeff Bush. On March the 5th, 2013, he was just taking a nap. Well, in fact, he was still in bed that morning. And just laying there, and can't feel safe in your own bed, in your own home. Don't they say that's the place where you should be the safest? In your own home, in your own bed, safest home in bed? Jeff wasn't. Nope, Jeff wasn't. Jeff's brother-in-law heard him scream. And he ran to the door, and when he opened the door, the whole room was gone. It was one giant sinkhole. Jeff had descended into the earth. The earth had swallowed him. They never recovered his body. They said that sinkhole was 20 feet wide and ended up being almost 60 feet deep. And they couldn't get his body out. They just filled it up and buried him right there. And his brother-in-law tried to save him. Tried to do what he could, but after a while there was no sound. He was just gone. He heard this guy scream. As far as we know, wasn't saved, didn't know the Lord. Sinkhole right underneath his bedroom. Gone. Time and chance. Like stepping off the curb and the bus happens to be coming. There have been meteors that have struck people in the head and killed them. Time and chance. You know a lost man lives like that? That scares me to death. Time and chance happens to them. God's not in their life, and they could. That's why he says, what is your life? He says, you know not what you'll be on the morrow. Time and chance, man. You might go out here to McDonald's, eat something, and kill you. You might go out here to some restaurant, man, you have the highest, they get the highest rate, and they feed you something, you're dead by the evening. You might contract a disease. You might get the flu. You suck in just at the right time and wind up with polio. Who knows? You realize how vulnerable a lost man is? Lost people are vulnerable. It's a crapshoot, man. And then when you throw the thing snake eyes one day and that's it, you lose. Thank God it ain't that way for you and I. Not even close. Now, I'm going to read you something a little long, but I'll be finishing up. Here's the difference. The last point is a man's life without God, it is a difference between daylight and dark. Now, I want to read this to you. Now, I've used this in a message before, but it teaches so many things. But just listen to it. It's a little long, but I'll read through it. It's Acts chapter 27, verse 14 to 44. But I'll try to read through it quickly. It says, but not long after there arose against it a tempestuous wind called Euroclydon. This is where Paul's being taken to Rome to stand before Caesar for the charges that were brought against him. He appealed unto Caesar, and now he's on his way there. But on the way, he's told them, do not loose from Crete, don't go. And they did it anyway. Why should they listen to him? He was just a prisoner. And now they're in a horrible, horrible storm. Now imagine yourself that you're in this storm. Or you're on a plane and you're flying and all of a sudden it runs into a big storm and everything, that thing's just a rocking and bucking and you're wondering what's going to happen. I want you to pay attention to this. And when the ship was caught and could not bear up into the wind, we let her drive. And running under a certain island which is called Clauda, we had much work to come by the boat, which when we had taken up, they used helps undergirding the ship, and fearing lest they should fall into the quicksand, strike sail, and so were driven. So they're trying everything they know to do to keep this ship together. They've got ropes wrapped around it to try to hold the thing together. And it says, and we being exceedingly tossed with a tempest, the next day they lightened the ship. They're throwing out everything that they can possibly think to throw off that ship. And the third day we cast out with our own hands the tackling of the ship. And when neither sun nor stars in many days appeared, and no small tempest lay upon us, all hope that we should be saved was then taken away. People on this ship have given up hope, man. We're all going to die. But after long abstinence, Paul stood forth in the midst of them and said, sirs, ye should have hearkened unto me. Just like a preacher. I told you so. Sirs, ye should have hearkened unto me and not have loosed from Crete and to have gained this harm and loss. He says, and now I exhort you to be of good cheer, for there shall be no loss of any man's life among you, but of the ship. For there stood by me this night the angel of God, whose I am and whom I serve, saying, fear not, Paul, thou must be brought before Caesar, and lo, God hath given thee all them that sail with thee. I want you to see something there. You see, God had a purpose and a will for someone on that ship. And someone on that ship is going to survive. You know why? God has a will and a purpose for that individual, which is really good for the others, because they might make it themselves. He said, wherefore, sirs, be of good cheer, for I believe God that it shall be even as it was told me. Howbeit, we must be cast upon a certain island. And when the 14th night was come, don't you know it's a long time to be in a storm, being rocked back and forth, throwing your guts up? And when the 14th night was come, as we were driven up and down in Adria, about midnight, the shipmen deemed that they were drew near to some country, and sounded and found it 20 fathoms. And when they had gone a little further, they sounded again and found it 15 fathoms. They knew they were coming up on some earth by the level of the water. Then, fearing lest we should have fallen upon rocks, they cast 4 anchors out of the stern and wished for the day. In the middle of the night, man, just throw anchors out and hope. Man, pray for some daylight to see what's going on. And as the shipmen were about to flee out of the ship, when they had let down the boat into the sea under color, as though they would have cast anchors out of the aforeship. What some of them were doing is they were panicked, and they were throwing up colors that they were going to go retrieve anchors, when actually they were abandoning the ship. You know, like an Italian captain of a cruise liner. You remember him? He's the first one off the boat. The captain's supposed to go down with the ship. Well, you know, the crewmen don't believe that. So they were trying to get out. And then Paul said to the centurion and to the soldiers, except these abide in the ship, you cannot be saved. Then the soldiers cut off the ropes of the boat and let her fall off. All of a sudden, they're starting to listen to Paul a little better now. And while the day was coming on, Paul besought them all to take meat, saying, this day is the 14th day that ye have tarried and continued fasting, having taken nothing. 14 days, man, that's a long fast. Try it sometime. 2 weeks. Wherefore I pray you to take some meat, for this is for your health, for there shall not a hair fall from the head of any of you. Don't you know that's a thing to say? Remember, they lost all hope of being saved. Now Paul's going to tell them, none of you are not, you're not even going to get hurt. And when he had thus spoken, he took bread and gave thanks to God in the presence of them all. And when he had broken it, he began to eat. Then were they all of good cheer, and they also took some meat. And we were in all in the ship 260 souls. That's 276 souls. Don't you know that's a pretty good sized ship? That's a lot of folks, man. What do you think the odds are they'll all get out alive? Come on now, give me the odds. What do you think? If time and chance were involved in this thing. And when they had eaten enough, they lightened the ship and cast out the wheat into the sea. They threw away their provisions. And when it was day, they knew not the land, but they discovered a certain creek with a shore, into the which they were minded, in the which they were minded, if it were possible, to thrust in the ship. They see this little opening, a cove or whatever, or a little creek, and they're saying, let's just ram that ship right in there and get out of this ocean, man. And when they had taken up the anchors, they committed themselves unto the sea, loosed the rudder bands, hoised up the mainsail to the wind, and made toward shore. They made a dash for it. And falling into a place where 2 seas met, they ran the ship aground. The fore part stuck fast and remained unmovable, but the hinder part was broken with the violence of the waves. The violence is hitting the back end of that thing, and it's breaking that ship literally in half. Verse 42, and the soldiers' counsel was to kill the prisoners, lest any of them should swim out and escape. But the centurion, willing to save Paul, kept them from their purpose, and commanded that they which could swim should cast themselves first into the sea and get to land. There are some people can't swim. And the rest, some on boards and some on broken pieces of the ship. And so it came to pass that they escaped all safe to land. You say, what's the difference? No difference in the storm. No difference in the waves. No difference in what the men are doing and what they're trying to do to save the ship. The ship is being broken apart. Some dive in and swim to shore, some on boards, but God is there. Every man's got a board. Every man's got a piece of something, or every man can swim. And He knows every wave. He knows every instance. He knows every gulp of water that's going down their throats as they're swimming. And they get to shore, and not a hair of their head's been harmed. That's the difference. While you're in that thing, brethren, you can't tell the difference. But there's a man on that ship that has God in his life, And now everything comes into play. Because why? He's the God of that storm. He's the God of calm. He's the God in every situation, the God of the hills. He's the God of the valleys. He's the God of the variables. He's the God of the, what's the other word? Huh? He's a constant, but He takes care of all the things that, circumstances. He's the God of circumstances. If you and I were on that ship, we're all going to die because it looks like it. You take Paul off that thing and you take a chance and a time and chance, and they probably all would have died. Or a good portion of them would have died. But because God was in there, none of them died. That's the difference in a man's life that doesn't have God in it. It's a crapshoot. It's the throwing of the dice, and maybe you'll make it and maybe you won't. That's not for me. Listen, you say, well, God could have just let the Christian die. Could have. On the Titanic, there was a saved preacher on that boat, and he preached the gospel till he drowned and succumbed to the water. But don't you know that was God's will for him? I got no problem with when God wants me to go. I just want to know He's there with me when I go. Just want to know that every variable, everything that happens, He knew. He allowed it. That's okay with me. But this thing where maybe I'll make it home from church today and maybe I won't, and I don't know where I'm going to go, and I don't know what my life's going to end up, whether I'm going to be poor or whether I'm going to be rich or whether I'm going to be healthy or whether I'm going to be sick, and I can't live like that. It drives me crazy. That's that uncertainty, but with God, it doesn't matter because I'm in His hand. And everything's controlled. I know that if it happens and He allowed it to happen and it's nothing I can do to change it, that's good enough for me. It's got to be. But at least His hand ordered it. And it wasn't time and chance. Man, if I was lost this morning, I'd get saved. I'd run to the altar, I'd get saved. I'd be calling on the Lord, asking Him to save me. Because I can't even imagine living a life that's scary. Because you've left God out of it. And your life is nothing but a vapor of smoke. Listen, I might be a vapor of smoke right now, but later on, I'm still here. I'm coming back. Better, longer, forever. So I don't mind being a little wisp right now. They say preachers are more smoke than anything anyway. But don't forget, with their smoke, there's a little fire too. You see the difference there? You see what God did? But you couldn't have told the conditions were different in any of those situations because you're reading it thinking, and God stopped the storm. No, He didn't stop it. And God stopped the crashing waves. He didn't stop them. They're still beating that boat to death. That's where faith comes in, folks. When you're on that plane, all of a sudden the captain says, we're going down. I mean, you might as well just say, well, I've never preached before, but it's a good time to start. Even you ladies ought to take it up at that time and say, believe on the Lord Jesus Christ, and thou shalt be saved. Because that's what that preacher did in the cold Arctic water that he found himself in when the Titanic sank. He preached it till he couldn't say it anymore. And there was one guy that heard him that got saved and lived to tell about it. At least you know if you're going down, say, well, Lord, this is it. This is it. I better go out. I'm going to go out with a bang. I'm going to go out preaching and witnessing. Why not? Paul, listen, by the time they're done, don't you... Now think, something else real quick. The aftermath. 276 souls, or 275 of them, looking at Paul going, I need to talk to you. I imagine there were Roman guards on there that probably were his guards in Rome. Or that talked to the other guards in Rome saying, whatever you do, you treat him right. Hadn't been for him, we'd have died. Hadn't been for his God, we'd have died. Don't you think it didn't have a profound effect upon them? And here's Paul, like he's talking to God, like he knew what was going to happen. What an arrogant fellow. But he was right, wasn't he? You know what's going to happen. You know if a man's lost, you know where he's going to go. Now, you may not know the direction of every little thing that happens in your life, and maybe God ain't going to tell you the end of it. But you know what the end of a sinner is, don't you? That's why you need to tell them. Let's all stand.